Welcome back to Kiss the Badge, the podcast that plays football with its collar up, its chest out, and with football heritage as its sleeve sponsor. My name is Ash, and this is the second time that I've recorded this podcast in the last 2 hours. And the reason for that is I've had a real nightmare. Honestly, I thought that the camera was rolling. Turns out it wasn't. Well, then, no, that's not actually true. The camera was rolling, and then my phone rang. So I got up to answer it. Had a little glance at the camera. It had stopped. It recorded me for 2 minutes, stopped recording, but obviously the audio is still recording from the microphone, so I've got all the audio, and it didn't record the video. So I lost, and I was talking to the camera for an hour. And so now I'm doing it all again. Not the best start, but hopefully, well, I've had a better day at least than Wales, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland, because yesterday they realised they wouldn't be going to the World Cup. So if you're a fan of one of those nations or you're from one of those nations, my commiserations to you this morning. However, we're all commiserating really because we're in another international break, and they're not a favourite of mine. They're probably not a favourite of yours. I don't know if they're a favourite of anyone's, but we find ourselves in one. And I mean, this international break at least there's a bit more riding on it. People playing for places in World Cup squads. And then those World Cup squads, a lot of them are playing for places at the World Cup. So for me, if you're going to do an international break, you do it like this. This is kind of, this has meaning behind it. England they're playing a friendly against Uruguay. Some people will be hoping to get themselves into that 26. England are allowed to take 26 players, as is every nation. It used to be 23, didn't it, back in the day? But it's 26 now. I might do a video at some point on me choosing my 26. I used to do that with my friends back in the day. We used to sit down and write down who we would take to the World Cup if we were picking the 26. I might do that. When I think of England-Uruguay, I get reminded of how I think Steven Gerrard is not one of the greats. Let me explain. World Cup 2014, England heading to a respectable 1-1 draw against Uruguay. Luis Suarez putting Uruguay ahead, Wayne Rooney getting us back in the game with a tap-in. And then around the 90th minute, Steven Gerrard thought it'd be a good idea to nod back to the keeper without checking, or sort of glancing it onto the keeper anyway, without checking who was behind him. Luis Suarez was behind him, wasn't he? And he finished it off and we lost. I mean, I think for me, and this is probably where I'm going to lose a lot of Liverpool fans, but I'll die on this hill. I don't think Steven Gerrard's all that. Too many mistakes, too much petulance. He didn't win a league title. To be one of the greats, you have to have won a league title. Yes, he won the Champions League. Okay. He had a great final, the Champions League final, the FA Cup final against West Ham. Gerrard was very much a moments player, and he did have some moments. But sometimes a lot of those moments ended up costing his team, whether that be England or Liverpool. He cost England in this game I mentioned against Uruguay. He did it at Euro 2004 as well against France. Same thing. No spatial awareness. Didn't look at what was going on around him. Played it back to the keeper. France end up with 2 goals off the back of that. And so when people have that conversation about Scholes, Lampard, for me, there is no debate to be had there. Gerrard's the worst of the 3. The other 2, I mean, I'm a Manchester United fan. I'm going to say Paul Scholes. I recognise that Frank Lampard was a fantastic footballer. Harry Redknapp was right. He did go right to the very top. There was, Harry knows. The big thing for me is the league title thing. I think, if you're part of a team like Liverpool or Manchester United or whoever it might be, you've got to be, if you're that leader, you've got to elevate those around you. I don't think Steven Gerrard did that. He had great players in that Liverpool squad, but he wasn't able to pull them over the line for a title. Yes, they got close, but he had that petulance. I've alluded to it already. His final game against Manchester United as a Liverpool player, sent off after 30 seconds. When he was brought on at half-time. Wasn't trusted to start the game, brought on at half-time, sent off after 30 seconds for a stamp on Ander Herrera. He cost his team. We don't even need to talk about the slip, although I'd very much like to talk about the slip. He cost his team a title there. Yes, of course, I know there was further to run in that title race, but that was the moment. We all know that was the moment. The Palace game after that didn't help. But for me, there's too many red flags with Gerrard as a footballer. The petulance, the bozo moments. He was a good player. He wasn't an all-timer for me. And that brings us nicely onto our shirt sponsor of the week. Actually, it doesn't bring us nicely onto it, but we're going to move on to it anyway. Shirt sponsor of the week this week is who else? Jägermeister, proud sponsors of Eintracht Braunschweig from 1972. There's an interesting story behind this one. 1972, Eintracht Braunschweig are a team that are based near where Jägermeister are based in Germany, and the CEO of Jägermeister, Günther Mast, saw that his local team was struggling, and so he spotted an opportunity within that. Mast offered to pay the club, Eintracht Braunschweig, £500,000 to change their logo to the Jaeger logo. The team were in debt, so this for them presented an opportunity to get somewhat out of debt. And for Mast, of course, it presented a marketing opportunity for Jägermeister. And the club were paid £500,000 to change their logo to the Jaeger logo, therefore circumnavigating the rules around sponsorship that existed within the Bundesliga at the time. The Bundesliga opposed the plan, but they couldn't actually stop the plan. And they remained sponsored for many years. And then in 1986, the High Court of Sport ruled that the club could also change their club name to Jägermeister Braunschweig. This was put in so that the whole club would be about Jägermeister. And of course, I mean, in the end, this didn't go through. There were some rules around youth teams playing with alcohol sponsors on their shirts that weren't permitted at the time. But it did open the door to Red Bull. Ironically, Red Bull, because Jägermeister, Red Bull, they go pretty well together. So they say, I mean, I have had a Jaeger bomb. That may surprise you, it may not. But I have had one. It was fine. I think if you want a little buzz on a night out, it's quite a nice thing to do with your mates. Quite fun. I wouldn't order one. I think it's one of those things where if somebody brings me one and says, I got you this, fine, I'll do a Jaeger bomb with you, fine. But I'm not going to go up and buy one. Do you know what I mean? One thing I do know about Jägermeister, it doesn't freeze. So if you put it in your freezer, it will go nice and chilled in there, but it won't freeze like water would, for example. So a little tip for you, if you're into your Jaeger, stick it in the freezer. Next time you want a little tipple, nice chilled drink. And then there's Red Bull. I mean, I don't actually drink Red Bull myself. Well, very, very rarely. In fact, one little life update for you. I've given up soft drinks because for me, no health benefit. I don't really have them that often anyway, so I'm not really massively going to miss them. My skin, my teeth and all that, it all goes a bit dodgy when I drink lots of them. I sort of feel it on my teeth. It's not a pleasant feeling. So I thought I'd do away with soft drink. Every now and again, I might have a Coke. If it's nice, hot weather, you might have a Coke with a bit of ice in the garden. No problem with that. But for the most part, I'm a soft drink free man. But Jägermeister is a shirt sponsor. I mean, that CEO came up with the idea, Mast, I think his name was. He didn't care about the team necessarily. For him, this was a business opportunity. He himself actually referred to this business opportunity as a means to an end. It was his local team, but he had no interest in football. He had no care for football. And, that's the bottom line, I think, with these companies that come in and offer them money and, give them money to football clubs for sponsorship. They don't care. They need football. Football for them is a place for them to peddle their wares. And, we're a billboard, football clubs. That's all football clubs are. That's all fans are. Look at me now. I've got Team Viewer on my shirt. I've got no idea what Team Viewer is or what it's all about. But I'm wearing it. I'm advertising it to you just by virtue of wearing it. These companies, they need football. But with the money involved now, and Eintracht Braunschweig are a good example of that, it also feels like some of the clubs need them. Football for me, it's about I'm a Manchester United fan. Manchester United, what does that mean? It means Manchester. It means the area, the people, the culture, the history of the place, the Busby Babes and the 99 treble and all that. That's what football is. It's heritage, it's history, and those are the things I love about Manchester United. That's why I fell in love with the club in the first place. The corporate view of football isn't that. The corporate view of football is that football is nothing more than an opportunity and an asset. The club becomes just an asset, another way for them to sell and make more money. And that isn't what football should be about. And no club story illustrates that better than RB Salzburg. I mean, 2005 Red Bull takeover, the club is reset. All that history that they built up under their previous identity, gone. I couldn't even tell you anything about it now because all I know them as is the Red Bull team. They even changed their shirt colours. It feels very wrong. Feels very, very wrong. Eintracht Braunschweig were in essence being sponsored by a soft drink or a sports drink or an energy drink, whatever you call it. Well, no, actually, no, this was an alcoholic drink, wasn't it? But they were fine. They were sponsored by a drink. Braunschweig was sponsored by a drink. But now, Red Bull Salzburg, Red Bull Leipzig, some clubs are a drink. What is that all about? I mean, can we even consider these football clubs, Salzburg, Leipzig, are they football clubs? Or are they just a marketing ploy? I don't see them as football clubs. They're not, it's not real. Anything they are now, and it's not their fault, they didn't choose it, but anything they are now for me is driven towards making money. It's not driven towards on-pitch success. That will help, of course. If they win the Champions League one day, that's going to help Red Bull's cause, but it's not the be-all and end-all to Red Bull. For them, their priority is making money, selling more Red Bull. So, my tagline at this point in the pod, when I sign off this section, is normally, it's bad, but at least it's not a gambling sponsor or something like that. This is almost as bad as a gambling sponsor for me. The reliance on industrialized sponsorship, if you like, sponsors being so involved that they become the club. It's not as bad as a gambling sponsor, but only just, I think. It's the lesser of two evils. Right, there's only one way to put this. The World Cup is fast approaching. It's really not far away now. I'm going to be doing a lot of content on this channel and on this podcast around the World Cup, of course. Naturally, that's going to happen, and it's going to be all different types of content as well. I've got lots of ideas coming up with that, so that's pretty exciting. But, I mean, with the World Cup, though, I will say this. The way we're going to engage with this World Cup as fans in the UK is going to be massively different to anything we've known in our lifetimes. This isn't going to be the sort of World Cup where we can just sit and watch everything. We are going to have to, as fans, prioritize a little bit. I'm happy to stay up late for games. The kickoff times for this World Cup are going to be all over the place. We're used to, in this country, you get home from work. There's a few games on when you're at work. Then you get home, you watch some games over dinner. Then there's some more games in the evening. Then you go to bed. That's generally how it works. And this World Cup's not going to be like that. There's going to be kickoff times at all hours, into the early hours of the morning. And so to sit and watch all the games, it's not really going to be possible. We're having to pick and choose a little bit. I've had a brief look at the fixtures myself, and, I'm happy to stay up late to watch Brazil-Scotland. That's going to be an 11 p.m. kickoff. That's the sort of game where you'll go, I'm going to be tired in the morning, but it's probably worth it. I'd like to watch that. Brazil, you always want to watch Brazil at the World Cup. Scotland, one of the home nations. Okay, we'll watch that one. We'll prioritize that one. USA, Paraguay, that's a 2 a.m. Do I want to write off the next day for USA, Paraguay? I don't know. Maybe I do. USA, the hosts. Maybe that might be nice to watch that game. Am I going to do it for Iran, New Zealand? No, I'm not. Absolutely not. That's a 2 a.m. I'm not staying up for that. It's one of those where if it was on in normal sort of sociable hours, you might watch it, or you might stick it on while you do a bit of ironing or whatever. I don't know. But 2 a.m.? No, it's not going to happen. But having said that, I hate the idea that I'm going to wake up the morning after that game and just see the score on my phone or hear about it on the bus. That's not what a World Cup's like for me. You want to throw yourself into it. Even if you're not watching the game, you want to have the option to watch the game. I'm not going to have the option to watch around New Zealand because I'm going to be asleep. A lot of the action is going to happen while we're sleeping. And I don't know if that sits very well with me. When it comes to World Cup, I like to throw myself in completely into it, into the culture, into the history, into the drama of it, all of it. And that isn't going to be possible this time. So it's going to be a bit weird. To fully immerse yourself in this World Cup, you'd have to be asleep from 4 a.m. till 12 lunchtime, then just stay awake for the day, watch games through the night, and then go to bed at 4 a.m. again. You'd have to become nocturnal. And I don't know about you, but I've got a job that I've got to do as well. So it's not going to be as easy as that. It would be nice to be able to do it, but it's not practical. And so it raises the question, and it's a bit of a controversial question. Should the World Cup be held in a country where people in that country are not particularly bothered about football? I know football or soccer in the US is growing in popularity. I know that, and this will only help that cause. I understand that absolutely. Messi going out there has helped. Beckham being there years previously to that has also helped. The game is growing in the US. However, the majority of the fan base for football, aka soccer, is in Europe. And a lot of it is here in this country, in the UK. And so you have to ask yourself the question, is holding a World Cup in a way that doesn't make football accessible to the fans that are going to enjoy it the most, is that right? I don't know. And I don't present an answer to that question necessarily. I'm opening it up to the chat. Should a World Cup be in America, given that people in Europe who love football, who live for football day in, day out, are not going to be able to watch the games? I mean, FIFA have already proved that they don't really care about the fans by pricing them out of games. The cheapest tickets available for this World Cup are $60, apparently. They are $60, but there's only about 100 tickets available for each game at that price. So that's not realistic, because the majority of fans are going to be paying £500 plus to go to games. That is not making football accessible to the fans. That is pricing fans out of the game, and it's not right. And they're being priced out to the point where a lot of fans from the UK and Europe and, Spain, Portugal, France, wherever, they're going to be saying, we can't afford to go to this World Cup. We've got to fly all the way to America. We've got to stay in hotels where prices have been hiked up. We've got to pay for tickets that are thousands of pounds or euros, whatever. So what are they going to do? They're going to stay at home and watch the World Cup like I'm going to do. I can't watch the games because the games are on in the middle of the night. And because I'm still at home and I'm not on holiday, I still have to go to work. So this potentially will be the most inaccessible World Cup for fans in Europe. And for me, fans in Europe are football fans. They are the ones who live and breathe the game. So I will say this, FIFA, shame on you, because I think football should be about the fans, and you've made it so it's anything but with this World Cup. And having said all that, I'm still going to watch games, aren't I? I'm still going to try and enjoy the World Cup. So FIFA, they don't care about me as a fan or you as a fan, but they've got me over a barrel because I'm still going to enjoy it. I still am a football fan. I still am a World Cup fan, and I still love the game, even though I don't think the game now is as good as it used to be. I make no secret of that. I've always said football for me, it peaked in the 1990s. And so it gives me great joy, actually. This is a nice segue. We're going to lead on to the topic of today's pod, which is I'm going to name an 11 of what I consider to be the best players. Or no, in fact, I'll rephrase this. I'm going to name a 90s World Cup 11. Now, I know we're doing something like this. You're opening yourself up to a bit of ridicule. There's going to be a lot of players I leave out. But I've tried to consider everything. I've tried to consider where the team finished in the World Cup, as in their nation that they played for. I've tried to consider the individual brilliance and the leadership qualities of the player in question. And I've also tried to consider the 11, so whether or not the players would play well together, etc., and so on. I am not shoehorning players in. I've tried to play players where they belong. So this is my 90s World Cup 11. So we're looking at the World Cups from 1990, 1994 and 1998. First of all, formation. It's got to be 4-4-2. We're in the 90s. There is only 4-4-2. In goal, and this might be a surprise, I've gone with a very short man called Fabian Barthez. It was between him and Tafarel from Brazil. Both of them played 7 games at the World Cup in which they were victorious. So for Brazil, that was 94. France was, of course, 98. Both goalkeepers played 7 games in their respective World Cups. They started every game. Barthez conceded fewer goals. So he conceded 2 goals at France 98, which is incredible. To Tafarel's 3. Still very good for Tafarel. Barthez also more clean sheets. 5 clean sheets at France 98 to Tafarel's 4 clean sheets at USA 94. Barthez also had a higher save percentage. I also chose Fabian Barthez based around the fact that I have picked some France defenders and I've picked a France centre-back. We'll come on to that in a minute. I want a settled back 5. And I figured, particularly with the centre-back that I have chosen, the link-up play between the link-up full stop between Barthez and this centre-back, you'll see. We'll come on to it. I mean, he was mad, wasn't he, Fabian Barthez? Mad as a box of frogs, as they say. He didn't have a good time with it at Manchester United, that's for sure. Lots of goalkeeping errors there. And when you look at Barthez, it shouldn't work. He's quite short. He's got a very different face and body to the sort of standard goalkeeper. He doesn't look like a footballer, let alone a goalkeeper, you know. But the thing with Barthez, he always threw himself in. You know, he wasn't afraid to get hurt. Some of the best saves I've ever seen, and particularly one of the best saves I've ever seen, was a Fabian Barthez save from, I think it was Dietmar Hamann, Liverpool against Manchester United. The save, you'll be able to put in on YouTube, Fabian Barthez save versus Liverpool. It will come up. Unbelievable save. He sees it late. He gets up, claws it over the crossbar. Was it Sami Hyypiä? I can't remember who had the shot. Look it up. Unbelievable save. And Barthez had that in his locker. And one other thing that he had in his locker was the sweeper keeper thing. And he was doing this before Manuel Neuer was Manuel Neuering. You know, Barthez was a little bit ahead of his time in that sense. And maybe that kind of just lends itself to the fact that he was a bit nuts. But yeah, I loved Barthez. Had to put him in this team. I remember seeing him in person when I went to watch Manchester United. It was my first ever Manchester United game, and we just signed Fabian Barthez. And I saw him. He was very close to where I was sitting doing his warm-up. And I remember it's the first time ever being starstruck from seeing a footballer in the flesh. It was my first big game that I'd ever been to. And seeing Barthez, he was a World Cup winner and he was a few feet away from me. And I couldn't get my head around that, you know. But also, he wasn't just as mad as a box of frogs. He could play. And so I've got Barthez in goal. Right back, this is going to be no surprise. I've gone for Cafu. He probably was the standout right back of the 90s. And maybe Gary Neville's in there. I mean, the problem is with Gary Neville these days, Gary Neville downplays himself a lot. So people these days don't realise how good Gary Neville was. I couldn't pick Gary Neville for this 11 because he only played at one World Cup in the 90s. But an amazing right back in his own right. But it had to be Cafu. He won the World Cup in 1994. He finished second in 1998, of course, to France. And in the next decade, he won the World Cup in 2002 as well. So it's, you know, he is him when it comes to right backs. Dependable, able to get up and down really well, involved in the attack as much as the defence, no off-field dramas. You know, in fact, I will say this, Gary Neville was pretty similar, just very dependable in that sense. You know, you never read about him in the paper. Do you know what I mean? Unless it was on the back page. And so I think actually, here's a question. Is right back the place where most sensible players play off the pitch? Like, has there ever been a right back that's gotten into trouble and we've seen him on the front pages? I don't think there has. Maybe Dani Alves? I mean, Dani Alves, I feel like a lot of that was just social media anyway. He liked his clothes, he liked his tats, he was into social media, all that kind of stuff. But there was no major dramas. It sort of felt very social media driven, all of the stuff around him. I don't even think he was a particular troublemaker, but maybe it is. Maybe right back is the place where all the boring people play. I don't know. But hey, I'm sure Brazil fans didn't mind that Cafu was perhaps a bit boring off the pitch because he played every game for Brazil in the World Cups in 94 and 98. One yellow card across the two World Cups as a right back. And even that was for a tactical foul against Morocco in France 98. So even when he's picking up yellows, he's doing it for the right reasons. He was quick, he was disciplined, he was, as I said, involved in the attack, able to get back and defend, a quality defender. Is he the best right back of all time? That's up to you. For me, yeah, probably. He probably is, and he's certainly in my 11. Let's go across to the other side now. We're going to look at left back. I've gone for Lizarazu from France. I can never say his first name. Is it Vicente Lizarazu? I think that might be it. Or Vicente? I don't know. Lizarazu from France. I've gone with him. France 98 was actually his first World Cup. He was 29 years old. So he was no spring chicken. He was in his prime though. 29, you know, that's prime years for a right back. Similar to Cafu in that he's very able to get up and down. Had an nous at both ends of the pitch. He actually scored at France 98, which again, right backs don't always chip in with goals. He did. It was the last in a 4-0 win. But still, you know, goal's a goal. He started every game at France 98 for France. 4 clean sheets. Can't speak. 4 clean sheets, 1 assist. Not bad. Here's a little thing for you that you might not know about Lizarazu. After he finished his football career, he got involved in jiu-jitsu and was European champion in the Blue Belt Senior 1 Light Division. Somebody who's into jiu-jitsu, let us know. Is that impressive? Because it sounds it. Lizarazu feels a bit of an underwhelming pick. I understand that. I thought that when I put him in there. But to be honest, I allowed him to go in because I just think actually not every player in the team has to be a superstar. You need a few steady eddies. We had that at Manchester United with Dennis Irwin. Solid 7 out of 10 every game. Fairly unspectacular as a person off the pitch. Wasn't a superstar by any means, but when you watched him play, boy, he could play. Same with Lisa Razou. That's why I've got him in there. Right, let's come on to the centre-backs. My first one, I've gone for Baresi. I feel like Baresi was probably in his pomp in the 80s, but we still saw a real special player in the 90s. I mean, he was slightly before my time in that sense, but he led Italy to a semi-final and a final, and he was the leader in that team. I had to have a sweeper in the team at the end of the day, because you need a sweeper when it's the 90s. It was a staple of 90s football. I feel like it's something that's completely gone out of the game these days in favour of high presses, zonal marking, that kind of stuff. It kind of killed the sweeper. But in the 90s, it was in its pomp, and Baresi was good at that role. He was good at centre-back as well, of course. Well, he wasn't good. He was incredible. And actually, when you think about Baresi, you think about this. He had a footballing brain that was virtually unparalleled at this time. Even, he was at the sort of twilight years of his career. His career was coming to an end in the 90s, but he was still dealing with and facing players like Diego Maradona, Romario. These players aren't a joke. These are serious ballers, if you want to say that. I hate that you use the word ballers, but I did, and we've got to move on from it now. He was dealing with those types of players. And Italia 90, Baresi started every game, 5 clean sheets. He's in the team at a tournament. 4 years later, in the USA, he's there, gets injured in the second group game. So he actually only plays 3 games at that World Cup. Italy's opener, the second group game. He's then injured until the final. But it shows again what emphasis was put on him as a leader within that team. He was out for the entire World Cup. He's fit for the final. He goes straight back in. None of this will get him on for 20 minutes at the end if we need him. No, we've got Baresi. We get him in the starting 11. And if you've not seen the highlights of Baresi's World Cup 94 final, I implore you, look them up. Unbelievable performance. It's a defensive masterclass. Italy, of course, lost the final in the end on penalties, but his defensive performance in the game, which finished 0-0 after extra time, he was assured, he was composed, his timing in that game, impeccable. He knew when to sit in and wait, but he knew when to press out, go get the ball and bring it out of defense, join in with the attacks. Unbelievable examples in this game of how a defender should bring the ball into play and start attacks. He was the best at it in this game. Watch the highlights of it. Unbelievable. He did miss his penalty in the shootout, which tarnished his final a little bit. But, anybody can miss a penalty. He showed bravery, he showed leadership in going first. He took Italy's first penalty and the first penalty of the shootout overall. Absolutely skied it. Worse than Baggio's. It's probably still rising now, that penalty. It's a real bad one. But his performance in the final alone was reason enough to put him in this team. What a player. And alongside him at centre-back, I've gone with Laurent Blanc. I mentioned Fabien Barthez is my keeper, so I had to have Laurent Blanc because if I don't, who's going to kiss Fabien Barthez's head? Someone's got to do it. That was their good luck charm, of course, that they had in World Cup 98 and Euro 2000 as well. And it worked because in both of those tournaments, France didn't lose a game. Every time that he did it, it worked. So I've got him in my team because, the old phrase in football, sometimes you need a bit of luck. And I feel like this is going to help us. You kiss his head. France didn't qualify for World Cup 94, but they did, of course, qualify as hosts in 1998. And Laurent Blanc started every game of the run to the final until the final itself. Blanc missing out on the final, of course, for slapping Slaven Bilic in the semi-final. And if you've seen it, there is nothing whatsoever in this. The fact that he missed a World Cup final for what was nothing more than a bit of grappling in the box as a set piece was delivered, it's a travesty. If I was Laurent Blanc, I would not be able to get over this. He's missed out on the biggest game of his footballing career, the biggest game in his nation's footballing history at that time, and he has missed out on it because some guy dived from a set piece. Unbelievable. Terrible from Bilic. Fully hammed it up. He touched Bilic around here touched him. He didn't slap him, he didn't hit him, he touched him. He's gone down like a ton of bricks, and as a result, Laurent Blanc misses that game. What an injustice. So for that reason, I thought I can't let him miss out on this team as well. Got to get him in there. His personal highlight of that World Cup, of course, probably wasn't even winning the World Cup, but it was scoring the only golden goal in World Cup history. It was scored by Laurent Blanc against Paraguay in the run to the final, 1-0 with a goal from Blanc. And I mean, it highlights the golden goal rule again, doesn't it? What do we think about it? For me, I mean, it feels like a bit of a failed experiment. They give it a go. Didn't quite work. I think the reasoning for it was good. They wanted more attacking football in extra time because teams were just sitting in defensively and shutting up shop and not wanting to lose the game. And the hope was that this would help them go and win it, rather than not wanting to lose it. Next goal wins vibes and all that. But the reality is that teams got even more scared, so it didn't work in the long run. And as a result, it was gotten rid of. So Laurent Blanc is still to this day the only man in World Cup history to have scored a golden goal. Right, that's my back five. We've gone for a 4-4-2, as I mentioned. So on the right wing, I'm not going to lie to you, I wanted Beckham. But I couldn't put Beckham in a 90s World Cup 11. Because the only thing we remember David Beckham for, if you forget for a second about the free kick against Colombia, is something that doesn't really get him into the team. I've said this before about the red card. I do think it was a red. I think Beckham probably had to go. He did kick out. Simeone did ham it up. Batistuta and all the others did get around the ref and encourage the red. But the ref was right there. He saw the kick. Yes, Simeone probably bought the red, but I do think it probably was a red. If that happened today, VAR would pull it and they would say he's kicked out here, he's got to go. And so for me, it's a red card. I still love David Beckham. I mean, I've got the shirt right here, right behind me here. And this shirt, by the way, this is the shirt from the game against the Greece qualifier, the free kick in 2002, or it was in 2001, but it was to get England to the 2002 World Cup. That was his redeeming moment from that red card. What happened in this very shirt right here, well, not this one, but, his version of this one. That was his redemption moment. So I don't think, Beckham didn't endear himself to the masses with that red card, but this made everything okay again. So I couldn't put Beckham in, so I thought, right, what am I doing here? Because this was actually the position that took the longest for me to fill. I've ended up going for Roberto Donadoni, the Italian. He was something of a system pick, if you like. A bit like Lizarazu. I've put him in there. He's not a superstar name. He's not an exciting pick, but he was disciplined. He had good finishes at World Cups in that he finished third and second at consecutive World Cups in the 90s. He was part of those two squads. Positionally, absolutely spot on. He was good at keeping the ball. Again, unafraid of getting involved in the attack, able to get back quick, a reliable crosser of the ball. He had a free kick in his locker as well. So, again, that's a Beckham tick. He did miss a penalty in the 1990 semi-final. But, and like I said, as a pick, he feels a little bit underwhelming. But I think for the system I've gone for the team I've gone for around him, he's going to work really well. So I've gone Donadoni. On the left, I've gone for Stoichkov. I couldn't leave him out. One of my favourite footballers from the 90s by far. He came onto my radar when I'm a Manchester United fan, as you may have gathered from this and from that. He came onto my radar in 94 when he was playing for Barcelona. Barcelona turned us over at the Nou Camp 4-0 in 1994. United were a little bit hampered by the foreigner rule at the time, which hampered the selection that Ferguson was able to put out. But the team that did get put out were completely turned over by Barcelona 4-0. Romario starring and Stoichkov playing a big role as well. And later that year at the World Cup, USA 94, he was the Golden Boot winner, scored 6 goals, showed up in the big games as well for Bulgaria, who were not fancied whatsoever at this World Cup. He scored in the semi-final, he scored in the quarter-final against Germany, and he remains to this day the only Bulgarian to have ever won the Ballon d'Or. When you think of Bulgaria and you think of football, you think of Stoichkov. And you think of their run in this World Cup. Bulgaria's run at USA 94 has gone down in legend. You had Stoichkov and his genius on the ball. You had Lechkov's diving header. Everybody remembers that against Germany. You had Ivanov's very terrifying combination of mullet and beard. They were sort of fused into one sort of terrifying concoction. If you've not seen it, look it up, but don't look it up before bed because you will not sleep. I mean, they had an iconic shirt as well, didn't they, Bulgaria, at that World Cup, the white one with the green on it. it was an Adidas staple back then. I mean, they had an iconic shirt as well at that World Cup. I'd love to get one of my grails, I got to say. That Bulgaria shirt, the white and the green on the shirt as well, the Adidas effort. Adidas had some really strong shirts at this World Cup, the Sweden one being another. But this Bulgaria shirt has been on my grail list for quite some time. I really like an underdog. And Bulgaria at this World Cup, they weren't fancied at all, but they did so unbelievably well. They were the surprise package of USA 94. In the same way that Senegal were in 2002, along with South Korea as well. Ghana were in 2010, Croatia at France 98. Every World Cup has a surprise package. Costa Rica in 2014. There's always a surprise package. At USA 94, it was Bulgaria. I love the shirt. I love Stoichkov. He's in me 11. Right, centre mid, the heartbeat of the team, and my captain, I've gone for Lothar Matthäus. It had to be. He was a must for any team involving World Cup icons from the 90s, if you like. He played at all 3 World Cups in the 90s. He was a mainstay in that sense. And he's one of only 3 players to have played at 5 World Cups, and that record stands to this day. He, of course, won the World Cup in 1990, which was a big year for Germany in all sorts of ways. I mean, they were going through a lot as a country at the time, and I'm a big romantic when it comes to football. Sometimes these things are just written, and I think for Germany to win that World Cup in 1990, the wall had come down, they were in the process of reunification, and then Lothar Matthäus wins them the World Cup and stands with it aloft. What a moment that must have been for him and for the nation of Germany. And as a midfielder, again, we talk about him in the context of football now. He is as good, if not better, than anything we've seen midfield since, I think. He's up there as one of the greatest central midfielders of all time. Discipline. He, of course, played the sweeper role in his later years, but as a central midfielder, he was disciplined. He was... he tidied up well. He was cute on the ball. He was able to go box to box and make things happen in an attacking sense just as much as he was defending his own box. He chipped in with goals. He scored an amazing goal against Yugoslavia in the World Cup. He could take a penalty. He was a leader. He was a captain, and he is my captain in this team. Giovanni Trapattoni once said this: "I admire Platini, I admire Maradona, but to win, I need Matthäus." Good enough for Giovanni, good enough for me. He's the only German to win the Ballon d'Or as well. He was a must for this team. And he's my captain with Baresi as vice captain. Any other team, Baresi gets the captaincy, but it's Lothar Matthäus. And alongside Lothar Matthäus in central midfield, I had to do it, Paul Gascoigne. I love a misunderstood genius. Manchester United had Eric Cantona, his shirt I've got right here behind me. George Best before him. Gazza has those vibes. He was our guy, he was one of us. He had those working class roots. He had that wicked sense of humour. He absolutely loved his football. He loved to drink. He was one of us. And we feel like that with Gazza, don't we? We feel protective over him, even to this day, because he's one of us. And we want to see one of us do well. And even to this day with his off the pitch struggles, I get a bit emotional with Gazza, I just want Gazza to be all right. And I think a lot of that does stem from Italia 90 and the tears and have a word with him, all of that. We saw how much it meant to him. When he knew he wasn't going to make that final, we saw how sad he was because England meant everything to him. Football meant everything to him, and our love for him is only deepened by that off the pitch stuff, I think. We just want to look after him and we want Gazza to be okay. But as a player, that sort of low centre of gravity, he was happy with players around him because he always sort of found a way out of that. He wasn't a selfish player with the ball. He was able to dribble with the ball, don't get me wrong. But he wasn't selfish with it. He knew when the moment was to give the ball to somebody who was in a better position than him, but he also knew when to take it on and when to find the back of the net himself. He represented something a little bit different, I feel, at that time, particularly around Italia 90 in English football. You think of English football in the early 90s and the 80s, quite dogged. I think of like a muddy old pitch with Terry Butcher with blood pouring out of his head. Gazza represented something else. He represented something exciting and something, dare I say, a bit exotic. And did you know this? Paul Gascoigne never scored a goal at a World Cup. He played at one World Cup, and that was Italia 90, and he didn't score at that World Cup. He, of course, didn't go to France 98, and England didn't qualify for USA 94. So that's one of the great shames, I feel, of Paul Gascoigne's career. He never played at more than one World Cup because he deserved that. And I would have taken him to France 98 if I was Glenn Hoddle. I'm not. Glenn Hoddle chose not to do that, and he had his reasons. But I just feel like there were moments in that World Cup where Gazza could have made the difference for us, and we didn't have him there. And again, trashing the hotel room when he found out, yeah, of course that's not okay, but it just shows how much it meant to him. England meant everything to him, and football meant everything to him, and I'm sure still does. And I love him. For me, he's in my top 10 of all time list. So he had to go in this 11, even though he only played at one World Cup. And I feel like he'd work quite well with Lothar Matthäus as well, in that Matthäus had that discipline about him. Gazza, therefore, would be able to be a bit freer and do his own thing. He was the yin to Matthäus's yang, if you like. Right, who have I got up front? Well, first of all, I've gone for Davor Suker. I feel like one of those names that you associate with 90s football. And I feel like with the team I've got, you've got Gazza, you've got Lothar Matthäus, you've got Stoichkov, the other striker that I'm going to name, you've got him as well. There's plenty of goals in this team, so the goal-scoring burden is going to be shared a bit. I wanted something a bit different from one of my strikers, so I've gone with Davor Suker. We think of him and we think of that chip against Schmeichel at Euro 96. But Suker, I mean, if you see his goals at France 98, and again, he was the Golden Boot winner at that World Cup, and he put Croatia on the map with how he played at that World Cup. A lot of the goals were they were in the box and they were slightly scrappy. Some of them were tap-ins. He was in the right place a lot of the time. He scored penalties. My team I've got, Stoichkov, Gazza, they're going to be taking shots. You want somebody in there who can tidy up the loose ends. Keeper spills it, you want Davor Suker there. Crosses coming into the box, you want Davor Suker in there. He could take a pen, important. I had to have him in my team. Again, another one at France 98 with amazing shirts. Croatia's away shirt is quite sought after these days. It's a bit loud for me. The red and the white and the blue is a bit clashy, but I quite like the checkered one that looks a bit like a picnic blanket. I see that and I think of Davor Suker, and I mean, it's just another example of a great 90s shirt, isn't it? Football shirts were just better in the 90s. They just were. Right, one player to go. No prizes for guessing who it's going to be. It had to be R9. For me, and I'm not going to go over it a load because actually everything that can be said about this guy has probably already been said. He's the best striker I've ever seen. He just is. He had it all. He was the complete striker, the phenomenon, R9. Technically brilliant. He had that explosive turn and pace. He had the step-overs. He had the skill. He had unbelievable strength. He was a clinical finisher. He scored all different types of goals. But above all of that, his mental persistence, unbelievable. He was mentally unbreakable, the guy. The injuries that he had in his career should have ended his career. But every time he came back again and again and again. If you've not seen the documentary about Ronaldo, I think it's called The Phenomenon. I encourage you to watch it. Really, really good watch and a great look at, for me, the best striker in football history. I didn't live in a time when Pele played. People talk about Pele in this way. For me, Ronaldo is just that. He is one of the best. He was no angel off the pitch. We know that, and I think it's okay to have a few of those players in your team. We've got Gazza, who also, as we know, is no angel off the pitch. Far from it. But as long as everybody in my team's not like that, I think we're okay. We can allow one or two. So Gazza, Ronaldo, fill your boots. At France 98, everything Brazil did that was good had a touch point with Ronaldo. 4 goals, 3 assists. He was player of the tournament. They didn't win it, of course. And we've been over the whole fit thing in the final. Will he, won't he play? But even that, the meltdown around that, when it was announced that Ronaldo wouldn't be starting in the World Cup final of 1998, the world went into meltdown. Not just Brazil fans. The world went into meltdown. And that just shows his importance and his brilliance. The fact that a player like that would be missing for that game was a big story and was a big moment. And did send Brazil into panic and probably cost them the final. Ronaldo didn't show up in that final. He wasn't right in his body, in his mind, whatever it was. Had he been right, we probably would have been celebrating 3 Brazil World Cups in a row. Well, we would have been in 2002 when they won it then, but anyway. But, if he'd had that experience of winning a World Cup in 1998, would the hunger have been there to push them over the line in 2002 like he did? Maybe it would win. We will never know that, but Ronaldo had to go in there. So that's my starting 11. I've got Barthez in goal. I've got a back four of Cafu, Blanc, Baresi, and Lizarazu. I've got a midfield four of Donadoni, Gaza, Matthias, and Stoichkov. And then up front, I've got Ronaldo and Suker. Very happy with my team, I've got to say. You've got attacking threat, you've got defensive stability, you've got creativity, you've got intelligence on the pitch. I feel like you've got it all. You've got the classic 90s formation. You've even got a sweeper in there. What more could you want? There's a few players that are unlucky to miss out. I feel like Romario probably had a shout. Baggio, although I don't know if I can have that ponytail. I feel like if one of my players had that ponytail, I would do a Fergie and ask them to cut it off. It's just a distraction. You know, what good is that going to do? I feel like the player most unlucky to miss out, well, there's two France players actually. Didier Deschamps. I feel like he's underrated in that France team. He was the central part of it. Zidane, of course. I know Zidane. For me, it was between Zidane or Gaza. I've gone with Gaza. Yes, Zidane was probably overall a better player, but I just love Gaza. I couldn't leave Gaza out. Baresi was perhaps a better player in the 80s as well. So he's probably a little lucky to be in there for a 90s 11. And as a result, Marcel Desailly misses out. He would have been in there if not for Baresi. But that final performance from Baresi, I just couldn't leave him out. So that's my 11. Let me know what I got wrong. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with, and who would be in your 11. I'd be really keen to hear from you. Leave a comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to this on Spotify, get involved on social media at Kiss the Badge Pod. I would love to hear what your 11 looks like because we've all got our opinions. That was mine. Right, that is the end of the pod. No time today for From the Stash. Although the shirt I am wearing is it's rather nice. It's a Manchester United one from, I believe, 2002. I've got Martinez on the back. Got it from Classic Football Shirts. But I've talked enough today. Throat's feeling a little croaky, so I'm going to stop there. But thanks so much for listening. Please do come back for another pod. World Cup content coming your way more and more as the tournament approaches. So we'll see you next time. And in the meantime, if you love the shirt, don't forget to kiss the badge. See you later.